Om Shri Ganeshaya Namah Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Sarvakarishi Sarvada Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. So as we are continuing our exposition and contemplation on the 9 forms of devotion, I want to go a little bit further into some of the background, as we were mentioning last time about the manifest and the unmanifest and why different approaches are used to try to move into that state of realization. When we use the word realization, or that is known as sakshatkar, that is a state of evolution where one is in touch with God, Bhagavan, the reality that is the Brahman, and no longer stuck within the vortex of the mind. So the mind is the mechanism, it's the means to actually evolve further. Why do we have a mind? What is the purpose of a mind? Mind is there, mind referring to these 5 things. It's thoughts, emotions, memories, desire, and energy. These 5 are together. So that is, we could just call that manas, but actually it's man, buddhi, chit, ahankar. We'll get to that some other time. That's another way of putting it. That is called antakarana. It's the inner instrument. So the mechanism of the mind has energy, has fuel as energy, and that can be utilized to open the door into that which we call God. Now, another way to think about whatever God may be, God, Bhagavan, Paramatma, any language you want to use, it is a state of constant joy, and that is the Atma. The difference between the realm of the mind and the Atma is just this much. In the realm of the mind, there is the duality, Sukh and Dukh. Everywhere we see in the world today, we see this duality, and within ourselves. Anywhere we look, we see there's some Sukh, there's some higher levels of Sukha, and then there's the Dukkha also. I mean, take for example, any experience that is a powerful experience. Take alcohol for example, or you take drugs or gambling or hypersexuality, any of these things that produce a potent experience. That experience doesn't last, it comes down, and then if you try to push it further, it will cause pain and suffering. So that cannot be ananda. The same thing is true with anything. Love of cars, love of homes, vacations, this, that. Anytime anybody tries to increase the material enjoyment further in an attempt to open the door into anandam or joy, the reverse happens. And that is an indication that Maya is at work. When this reverse effect happens, that is where Maya is at work. Otherwise, if there was a way to open the door into pure, undisturbed joy, just using drugs, illegal drugs, or these cocaine and heroin and all these things that are available in different ways, or other medicines or whatever, or even just like process-oriented activity, if there was a way to open that door, the whole world would be high on those things. But that's not possible. Not at all. Simply because the brain and the mind are not set up that way. That is not their purpose. The brain and the mind have a certain level of experience within their purview. And that level of experience, that type of experience, will allow the individual to realize that there is something beyond that realm of experience. So when we see the nature of the mind, we see that it is moving obviously in different directions. It is also quite fast. Also, whatever experience is available mentally, psychologically, emotionally, in our human level, is a mixed experience. It is not a state of constant joy. And if we really ask ourselves, what are we looking for? That is what everyone is looking for, a state of constant joy. That is called ananda. So to reach that state of constant joy, the biggest obstacle and the biggest promoter, both, it can be an obstacle as well as the promoter towards that path, is desire, ichha. We have desires to experience the material world and the multitude of experiences that come within it. Of course, the more one has, let's say, financial power, to that extent they can experience the material world greater, to a greater extent. That doesn't mean that just by experiencing the material world further and further and further, that opens the door into joy. In fact, there's saturation. And then the other side is that there's the pain and suffering of not being able to live in the material world comfortably. That's another problem. So we must be able to live in the material world in such a way that it facilitates our development towards the super consciousness, higher consciousness. So the material world becomes an aid for us rather than a place where people are stuck or where there's torment and trouble in the material world. And that is the whole point. Isko in Hindi we say bhukti and mukti. Bhukti means the certain level and amount of material that we need, food, water, clothing, shelter, those are the basics, but then beyond that, we want good family life, we want good relationships, all those good things that come in this material frame, we want them, but not in such a way that is going to entrap us. And that's the big difference here. The entrapment in the material world is the biggest problem. So, and there, those entrapments, how many are there? Endless. There's no end to the expression of Maya. Similarly, or in that vein, if our attempt is to realize the pure joy, then the realization of the nature of desire is the key, ichha. Desire meaning ichha. And the experience that is provided by the material reality when the desire is fulfilled. So for example, let's say I'm sitting here and I want to drink a cup of coffee. We'll take simple, very simple example. There are more complicated ones, obviously. If I have a desire to drink a cup of coffee, there's a ichha, there's a desire, that's an impulse that says, yes, I want a cup of coffee. Now if I want a cup of coffee, do I want the cup of coffee or do I want the experience the coffee provides? The experience provided when drinking the coffee, the sensation, the smell, the taste, the temperature, and then I drink it, and then after I drink half a cup or a quarter cup or a whole cup, I feel, this was a good cup, and then the caffeine impact, the person feels more awakened. It's not the cup of coffee we want. Let's be clear about that. That's not what we want. What we want is the experience that the coffee provides. If it didn't provide the experience it does, why would we take it? If we drink just water, that doesn't give us the experience of a cup of coffee. No. Just like that with all sense objects. If we eat a gulab jamun, like a sweet, that has a specific flavor taste, but another kind of sweet will have a different flavor taste. Similarly, the point is that the senses and the experiences of the senses give us this wide range of experience within the material world. Now, is that experience a problem? Not really. It can be a problem, but it can also be towards one's benefit. In fact, every experience of the material world is existing because there is Atma. If we're not alive, we're not going to experience anything. The fact that experience happens at all is an indication that we're alive, which we have our direct sense that, yes, I am alive. That's our consciousness, that's our sense of being alive. And because we're alive, we have these experiences. Now, those experiences are mixed. Somebody says, I want a cup of coffee, you can enjoy one cup of coffee, no problem. But somebody has to drink 10 cups, 12 cups, 15 cups, as people do. That is where the trouble begins. trouble begins by trying to increase the sensory enjoyment in an attempt to open the door into that joy, or the attachment towards that specific type of enjoyment is the individual tries to enhance that further and further and becomes trapped within it. Like in the case of any addiction, that's exactly what is meant by addiction. And people are addicted to watching TV also, and it's not just drugs, alcohol, and gambling, other things. It could be anything, So even things like being so immersed in somebody else's life and other people's lives and worrying about all that, we get kind of almost like an addiction to all those things also, rather than keeping things at a certain distance and having the right relationship, but not getting entangled. And that's perhaps the most important word, which I've used over and over again, is how not to be entangled within the material framework. The material reality is not there, created by God, for us to be trapped in that. But that's what's happened. So this Navavida Bhakti, this Navaratna Malika that we have been examining carefully, is an attempt to break through that. And that is the essence of this whole idea, that when we are trying to realize what is pure joy, we have to realize that the mind and its fluctuations are not joy. They are like some flickers of experience. They come and go, and then there's so much suffering in that also. But when we realize that we don't want to be in the suffering, if we can realize that state which is beyond the suffering, and if we want that, these 9 forms of devotion are the key. I mean, and again, why is it called devotion? It is specifically devotion to God. In any theistic tradition, there is a dualism there, that there is God and there is me, the devotee, and I'm worshipping you. And that's what this is, very basic. Whether it's the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, or the bhakti strands in the Hindu tradition, or even in Buddhism and other places, there's still the worship process is still there. Even in Advaita Vedanta, there's a lot of worship that is done to get to the Advaitic state. So in however one may look at it from any tradition, the importance of devotion is there, and these 9 forms of devotion towards Paramatma are the key. Now, as we are examining this further, to actually do this activity, this 9 forms of devotion, it requires several things. It requires 3 things. One is that it requires a belief in God. That is called Swarup Nishta. Swarup Nishta means that there is Paramatma in any Swarup that one likes, based on tradition, and so there is the faith in that Swarup that is developed over time. So somebody is worshipping Sri Krishna, or like in South India, there's a lot of emphasis on Venkateshwar. There's also emphasis, let's say, like in North India, let's say on some of the Shakti Peeths. There's different ways of doing the upasana. Some people worship the gurus or sadgurus. So when that is going on, there is faith that is developed that yes, that Paramatma is there. So without Shraddha, that there is God that we cannot understand, but in particular form, particular way we are worshipping, we are going through the devotional practice, then the mind begins to get colored by that practice. You see, but the biggest obstacle is again desires that pull away from this. And that's because we want something else that seems even very attractive, something else that the mind is still seeking. And that's where the Navada Bhakti in most people's lives does not reach its culmination point. It doesn't reach its culmination point because the desires within the heart, within the individual, are pulling the individual in different directions. And so an understanding of desire, realization of what it gives, what it provides, and how not to let it get pulled away, not to destroy the bhakti. Because see, this is a malika, right? Navaratna Malika. Navaratna Malika is the garland of 9 gems. So these are the most extraordinary gems, meaning the gems in the sense that they are qualities within the individual, that once they develop, they are gems offered to God. They are the devotional gems. There's no ego in this. There may be some ego in the beginning part of it, but all that thing dissolves as one goes into Navavidha Bhakti. It's particularly the ninth one, Atma Nivedanam. We'll get to that later on. But the fact of the matter is that desire pulls an individual away from Navadha Bhakti. Desire for the material objects. So what to be done in that? If the desire is pulling an individual away, okay, if it's pulling a person away from there, we can see ourselves, okay, I'm getting pulled in this direction. What is it that I'm seeking? Is what I'm seeking, if I get that, what will happen after that? And is that joy? So these kinds of self-reflective questions need to be asked by oneself before one takes a path of going further into the material experiences. Take the example of buying a car. Someone, let's say, has a pretty good functional car, but they go to some dealer, and then they find like a really much more expensive, very attractive vehicle. It's very attractive. So then what? Does it mean that one doesn't just shuns all attractive things? It doesn't really mean that. It's a question of, if I get that, is that joy? If I get that, what am I getting? I'm getting an experience for some period of time. Is in the overall context of my life, is that the experience that I want to have? And can I afford it? Is it going to benefit me somehow? And could it also be that I'm running after something just to run after it for some temporary stimulation? That's all. But I don't really need it. I don't really there's nothing really of much more benefit except for a temporary kick that one gets, like a temporary stimulation. So those are all questions to ask when one is taking a path towards God through bhakti and is being pulled in different directions. So if one is getting pulled, see what it offers you, what experience it gives. And so from that, the 9 forms of devotion, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam. So what happens in this? When we are remembering God, Shravan, when we're remembering the Smaranam, remembering the scriptural ideas, the charitras, the different teachings, our mind begins to evolve. That is why it is called a Navaratna Malika. It's a garland of 9 gems, because it is going to take the energy within us and evolve it further. The mind evolves into like a divine mind, into an anointed mind, into a bhakti infused mind. So it is our internal evolution that we are seeking. And if that evolution is not happening, then we are just in ritualism. If people are even doing rituals, then it's just ritual. Ritual may be a beginning, but it's certainly not the end. So the evolution is day to day, moment to moment, with a realization of the internal pull towards the material objects. And those internal pulls that are present, these things have power within them, and they give, and the jiva is seeking a certain experience, as I said before. Now, when we are absorbing in God consciousness, moving into God consciousness through Navadha Bhakti, that is also an experience within the mind. There's no question that is an experience within the mind, but that experience within the mind evolves the mind. It slowly, the mind begins to get in synchronicity with bhakti, and then the power from within, the emotional and devotional power begins to increase. And as that begins to increase, there is more and more natural stability of the mind and experience of joy, and eventually the experience of the Atma, or the reopening of the Atma. So that's the progression we're looking at. Why do all of this? What is the result in some sense? The result is that the emotions begin they reach a divine state, and then there is a greater opening within in meditation of the Atma. And so when the Atmic consciousness begins to open up, we begin to experience extended states of joy. And so jisko divya ananda kehte hai. There are times, and I've gone through this myself, and some of you may have also, I'm sure, that as you go into devotional states, there are times where you just want to remain in it. You don't want to come out of it. Now see, this happens even in the worldly life. Things that we really enjoy, like a party or like a dance or something like that, and there are states of mind where we just want to be in it. We don't want to get out of it. This happens in something like gambling, for example, which I've had some experiences in my life. So in that, there are periods of time where a person just wants to stay in that and doesn't want to come out of it. It happens in many other contexts, even if you're having a great meal, like a great food, like a 7-course meal, with nice company and this and that. You just want to, there are states of mind where you just want to stay within that. Why is all that there? Because that is a way for God to showing us, if you can experience that in the material world, see what the spiritual dimension might be like. In the spiritual realization, there is the same possibility, but it is much more intense and it can be continuous. In the material world, it is never continuous because of the 3 gunas. It's not continuous at all. It is for the time, it comes and goes, and human beings want to make it continuous. There's no question. Somebody likes something, whatever it is, there is a tendency psychologically to take it further and further to experience higher states of that. And actually, if we look at the whole material world's development, that's what we see. We see more and more refinement and development of goods and products to give us wide range of experiences. Isn't it so? So we can see that. Similarly, as one increases the devotional practices of Shravanam, Kirtanam, different bhajans, Kirtan, Manan, Chintan, as one increases these practices, including yogic practices, mantra practices, all of that, eventually the rasa, the bhava in the rasa begin to show up. The rasa is the taste for it, not the physical taste. The inner experience of it begins to show up, and that is where jnana is really necessary. Knowledge is necessary. The vision is necessary to realize that this rasa that is showing up within us, it is a beginning. It is an ecstasy. It can be the ecstatic rasa, but that leads to ananda. In more technical language, that ecstatic rasa is within the anandamaya kosha, the 5th kosha. So we have 5 layers before the atma. So there's the annamaya kosha, pranamaya kosha, annamaya kosha, pranamaya kosha, manomaya kosha, vijnanamaya kosha, annamaya kosha. There are 5, and I'll show you some diagrams on that later on. But those 5 layers are there. So when we, even in devotion, sometimes you feel so much ecstasy, it's like it's just so awesome, and it's a great feeling. That is the anandamaya kosha. It's anandamaya. It is close to ananda. So ananda is infused within that, but it is still somehow there's a layer there between the pure ananda and the anandamaya kosha. So the anandamaya, we get glimpses of anandamaya kosha when there are ecstasy type of experiences. Some glimpses of that are there, but that is also not still the final thing. So we are to move into a state of constant joy. That is a realization of the Atma. So one is freed completely from the clutches of Maya. The clutches of Maya are within the realm of Sattva Gun, Rajogun, Tamogun, and the power of sadhana can be such, and the grace of God, Bhagwan ki Krupa, by the grace of God, an individual is pulled away from that Maya completely and taken back to the source, which is Ananda. And then one lives in the world like anybody else, but one is living without fragmentation of the mind, without confusion, without entrapment, with tremendous clarity. That person is a Jivan Mukta, is a living, liberated being. That is what we are aiming towards. That is what we want. Why we have temples and mandirs and satsang and pujas and archanas and 100 things are there. All of these things are there for only one purpose, so that ultimately we can eventually move into a state of living liberation. And the living liberation is such that there is joy that is moving through us constantly. It is a continuous joy because there is greater and greater and greater realization of God internally, of Bhagwan and the Atma. Both are realized further and further, further and further. So then what about the material enjoyments? What happens in the material enjoyments? Material enjoyments are like bubbles only. They just come, they're there. They're not rejected. They're there. But they are seen for what they are in its entirety, and the enlightened being never runs after them because of seeing how limited they are. They may interact to some extent. Limited interaction is there in the material world because there is the opening of the divine wealth. If you have opened up the infinite joy from within, the small things, everything is small in this material world compared to that. It's like this: if you have, $100 billion, and if somebody says, "Here, I'm going to give you, $5 bill. Here, you take this." Okay, you may respectfully take it for some reason, but you have $100 billion. Where is the issue? Where is the comparison even? So if you can imagine somebody who has $100 billion, someone like Bill Gates or someone like that, and he is now crying for losing $5 or for something that's worth $5 value. It's like this Jivatma is actually a multi-billionaire from the point of view of God, but doesn't realize. He's become so tiny and so limited. It's unbelievable. And as a result of that, it's crying and is tormenting itself by running after the material world in a very limited way without being a Jivan Mukta. The Jiva that is bound can become a Jivan Mukta when it realizes what it is, that it is the Atma, not this limited being, and it realizes that it has within itself the repository of infinite joy. Ananda Ananda, Brahmananda, Nityananda, Akhandananda. This is with us all the time. But because of not realizing that, by mistakes and by getting engulfed within the three gunas of Maya, is looking for that same joy within the realm of Maya. And within the realm of the material world. The material world can never, ever, under any circumstances, open the door into pure, undisturbed joy. What it can do is it gives us a glimpse of experience. It gives us certain experiences so that those experiences can be seen by the mind, and the mind can realize that those experiences, as great as they may be, are very limited. Then the search begins for that which is unlimited. So that is why the material world exists. People say, why did God create the material world? There's only one answer, in my mind at least, and that answer is that the material world is created so we can transcend its limitations. That's why it's created. It's like saying, why is a school created? Why is a university created? Why these colleges exist? So eventually people can graduate out of them, not stay in them. Somebody goes into University of Delaware and year after year they're just in the same university for the next 30 years. Does that make any sense? No, that is only a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. That is true with everything in life. Our family life is also like that. Why family is there? So we can transcend it. Why relationships is there? So we can transcend it. Why do we have money? So we can transcend it. Why do we have desires of all different kinds? So we can transcend them. Why do we have pain and suffering? So we can transcend it. Why are we running after material things? Why those desires are there? So we can understand desire and transcend. Everything that occurs in life in the material framework, A to Z, exists so that we can go beyond it. We cannot go beyond Maya unless Maya expresses itself. And once Maya expresses itself, we have the opportunity to see what is the essence of Maya, the purview of Maya, and then with that, with the lineage of the great sages and gurus that have come from Vedvyasji downwards, and even before him, this whole notion of Navada Bhakti and all of this that we're talking about is then necessary to move into that higher state of realization, move into the Atma and Paramatma. So if one realizes the nature of the material world completely as it is, the running after it stops. But then what? Then the mind still needs to be connected somewhere, so it gets connected to Bhagavan, and then that leads to liberation. So the liberation is occurring by the mental connection to the higher consciousness. It's not going to happen just by retracting from the material world. That is just a dull state. That is just a very dull and no experience kind of state. People try to do that, go into caves and stuff like that, or just have no experience, cut off. There may be some realization in that, but a much more important approach, according to our original scriptures, is that connect with God. So the connection with Bhagwan really begins when one recognizes the nature of the material world, and then goes into the cause. Where did this material world and everything come from? That is the cause, the Karan, Sarva Karana Karanam. That the cause of all causes is the Paramatma. So our attention is diverted to the cause of all causes, and no longer within the purview, and no longer entrapped in the material world. We may live in the family and everything we do, but our attention is turned towards the highest reality. And when that happens, that is a true form of sannyasa. Sannyas doesn't mean putting on orange clothes or gray clothes or white clothes or blue clothes and running around in this world. That is not the meaning of sannyas, nor is there any definition of sannyas like that. Sannyas basically means that one is taking the attention, energies within, realizing the nature of the material world, realizing that this material world cannot open the door into super consciousness. It has limited experience, so we transcend it, take the same power within it, without raga or dvesha, without getting into any kind of tussle with the world, and then at the same time taking our energy and attention and placing it at the feet of God. That is called Atma Nivedanam. That is the 9th form of devotion here. So that entire of who I am, the me completely is surrendered at the feet of God. It's completely placed there. There is no ego there. There is a total relinquishing. And that is one of the highest states in bhakti. So this is all possible. Again, God is not some delusion or something like that. It is a matter of faith, but it is also a matter of tradition and experience that the concept of God may be developed, but the realization of God is coming from the lineage of the sages. They have realized something, and they are encouraging us to do the same. So on that basis, let us move forward, and then I hope was clear to some extent, at least. I mean, it's a very interesting discussion. We'll have to go into it in definitely more depth later on sometime.